Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Plans Under Pressure, Smart Strategies for Employee Benefit Sustainability. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'm just going to go over a few small housekeeping items. We will be recording today's webinar. Following today's discussion, you will receive a link to the recording which you can share with your colleagues. During our webinar, you can submit questions and comments in the questions section in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. After the conclusion of our broadcast, you will see a survey pop up before exiting. Please take a few seconds to fill it out as we appreciate your feedback. I would now like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Matt Bateman, Vice President Sales, Employee Benefits and Retirement, Jimmy Dang, Actuary, Benefits Consulting, and Lydia Palkowski, Health and Performance Practice Leader. And with that, I will hand things over to our speakers to get us started.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. We've provided a bit of an agenda and an overview of what we intend to cover today. And I also want to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who submitted questions prior to the webinar. We will be incorporating as many of those questions with some guidance and some responses throughout today's presentation. However, if we have not covered your question, rest assured that we will follow up with you following today's webinar. So to give you an idea of what we're looking to cover off today, we want to kind of give you a sense of what we're seeing from a current labor market perspective and some of the trends we're seeing within the labor market. We're going to provide you with some broad sustainability approaches and strategies, both by market segment, but also some strategies that aren't specific to the size of your business, geographic location, or industry. And then we're going to follow that up with some key takeaways and some actionable items that you can deploy within your organization. So to get us started, it really kind of helps in acknowledging, what type of landscape most of you and the organizations you work within have really kind of been, working through over the last kind of 5, 6, or 7 years. And, kudos to all the business and HR leaders who are on today's call and what you've navigated within your organizations and within the landscape, because it's certainly been a turbulent journey, whether that be, the intersection of rising costs or some of the economic and geopolitical uncertainty that lies ahead of us, combined with some of the labor force challenges and managing the diverse workforce that we have in front of us. It really hasn't been an easy ride over the last 5 years. And we've certainly seen an immense amount of change over the last decade, more so than we've seen in the past. So kudos to everybody on this call. In the same type of breath, the employee experience has been something we've seen kind of brought into focus over the last, kind of 5 to 7 years as well. And so as much as organizations and as companies, we've navigated a fairly turbulent journey, the employees that really kind of form our organizations and form our teams, they haven't been immune to the same type of turbulence. And so if we think about, again, that last 5 to 7 years with the onset of the pandemic, for the push to remote work and then the tug of war to bring people back. Couple that or followed up with, kind of a period of rapid growth where most organizations were, kind of starving for talent, and that war for talent became more prevalent than ever. Now kind of tapering off with some of the economic uncertainty and inflation or what have you. Our employee experience has certainly been affected by the environment we've been in. So, not unlike what we've been navigating as business and HR leaders, our employees certainly have had an interesting period over the last 5 to 7 years. So when we start, kind of peeling back the onion to kind of understand, well, what's really happening from a population standpoint inside of Canada, we started to kind of really dive into where some of the seismic shifts were within our population. And we started to segment out by age category. And what you'll see in front of you is some of the data from Statistics Canada ending in the year of 2022. And you'll see where I'm coming from with respects to why we drew that line there. But just really quickly, the 5 years ending in 2022, what we saw was a mass size or a sizable section of our overall population who were looking to exit the workforce. And so from this chart, what you'll notice is the top 3 fastest growing segments in Canada's population were all over the age of 60. Right, which presents a massive challenge for us and a major gap with respects to the labor pools that we're drawing on to fill roles within our organization. And if you look at kind of where we're at from an under age 30 and under age 20, we simply didn't have the organic growth or kind of the pool of new talent, if you will, entering the workforce. So we have a gap in terms of kind of who's looking to leave, coupled with a stifled growth in terms of who's looking to join. All the while, kind of in that mid category, age 50 to 60, we saw a rapid decline, which traditionally is where we've sourced a lot of our senior leadership and where a lot of the institutional knowledge sits inside of our organization. So, theoretically, we've got this perfect storm with respects to the aging population, as well as kind of a shortage in our labor pool, which has created some challenges within our organizations. And so if we look at, where we've come from 2022 in through 2024 and through into 2025, what we've come to see is a massive change in terms of where we've seen some of that growth. And really that's a product of some fairly aggressive policy on the immigration front, to help bridge the gap on some of the shortfalls in our labor pool. And, most of us would view this as good news. I think, we're cautiously optimistic with respects to what this means for our overall population, just based on some of the tightening up on our immigration policies and et cetera. So we'll keep a close eye on this in terms of what this is going to really mean for our organizations and where we're going to start sourcing our talent. In terms of what the new labor market really looks like, we've identified 10 key trends, and we're really not going to go through all of them because that could be a completely separate webinar in its own. But if you have attended any of our previous webinars or workshops, you would have heard us talk about the 5 generations in the workforce. You would have heard us talk a little bit about hybrid work past age 65, the impact of immigration, upscaling, and the focus on employee well-being and mental health. And many of those trends have continued through into the labor market into 2025. But if we touch on economic uncertainty for a second, I don't think it'll be a shock to anyone that, for us to identify that the high living costs have really kind of accelerated employees' demand for proactive financial guidance and really kind of enhanced retirement support. The impact of inflation, has really become something we've spent a lot of time in understanding. And a recent study from Manulife suggested that 40% of Canadians who were surveyed rated their economic situation as fair or poor. And this presents a tremendous opportunity for us as organizations to really have an impact and start to equip our employees with tools to help them, in solutioning these types of scenarios. And the impact on mental health, and specifically kind of the impact on productivity and mental health, is quite pronounced. From a retention and a recruitment standpoint, these are still certainly high on CEOs' lists. What was really fascinating is a recent PWE survey that came out a few weeks ago suggested that 32% of Canadian CEOs questioned whether or not their organizations would still be around in a decade, which is quite shocking. So from a retention and a recruitment perspective, it's going to be inherently important for us to start to structure total rewards in a way that supports our ability to keep key talent inside of our organizations and also source some of that attractive talent from the labor market. In terms of, kind of the mental health and well-being lens, or a focus on mental health and well-being, we're seeing, certainly a scenario where we have a lot of opportunity to start to readjust or rethink the way we're deploying benefits and what benefits really starts to mean. And the bundling of mental health and well-being into a more integrative and preventative type of approach is becoming more prevalent in the marketplace today. Employers are starting to really broaden that definition beyond the traditional, right? So integrating physical, mental, and preventative health really starts to bind that holistic structure. And certainly there's tremendous opportunity for us by looking to creative solutions such as wearable wellness incentive programs, well-being retirement counts, and so forth. So for the benefit of today's webinar, with the focus on plan sustainability, and approaches in plant sustainability, we're going to take this now into some broader concepts to help you with your design and your strategies, and then we will move into market segment tactics. And I'll pass it over to Jimmy.
All right, thanks, Matt, and appreciate the overview of the labor market there. So before we get into the actual tactics for today, I just wanted to provide an overview of the approach and share the framework that we're using here when we're looking at ways to find sustainability within our benefits plan. And it's important to share the framework because we recognize that each organization is different, and having an understanding of where our areas of focus are, how our approaches will allow you as an organization to work with your advisor to ensure that you build a strategy that's actually meaningful for you. Like we definitely have tactics that we will share today, but again, not all of them may be applicable to each organization. So it's important to get an understanding of the framework that we're trying to put together and the levers that we're pulling. But essentially what we base it on is our cost control index. And for those who aren't familiar with this tool that we have here at Hub, it essentially looks at plan sustainability in 4 different areas of the plan. So looking at the plan design, health and performance, financial arrangement, and carrier management. And essentially what we do here is we review each of these factors and develop a score in terms of sustainability with the plans we work with. We then benchmark that to really determine which changes can be made that would make the most meaningful impact in terms of plan sustainability. And you see here that all these levers that can be pulled will impact claims costs and potentially premiums as well. Plan design, of course, like different limits or what's being covered in terms of what you're providing your employees will have an impact. Health and performance, the wellness of your employees. If you're focusing on preventative health and there's less claims coming through, that'll have a positive impact to your plan. Financial arrangements. So these are more arrangements as to like who is taking on the risk. Is it your organization or the carrier, and which type of arrangement would make sense based on your organization? And then of course the final lever here we have is carrier management, and that's important to look at as well because carriers are of course they're in the business to make money, and they're charging expenses for their services and their administration. So we want to make sure that what the carriers you're working with and what's being charged is aligned with what we're seeing in the industry. So today with all the participants in our audience, it's a very diverse audience, and every organization from many different organizations, and we'll help you try to determine which tactics are most applicable to you, really by looking at segment by market size. So the 3 different segments we're looking at today: small organizations, less than 50 employees; medium organizations, 50 to 200; and then larger organizations, which for the purpose of today's presentation, we're defining as more than 200 employees. But essentially, each of these segments have some unique characteristics of each of them, which come into play when we're looking at as to which tactic makes sense. So for smaller organizations, your financial risk is typically limited to the premiums that you pay to your carrier. And also, depending on how large you are, there's most likely limited access to claims data and fewer plan management levers that you can pull. And even for smaller organizations, you may have a small or no HR department at all. So just some things to consider as we're looking at these tactics. For medium organizations, here is when your claims experience starts to become incredible, meaning that the carrier takes it into consideration when setting your premium rates. There tends to be more flexibility as to what type of risk you can assume and benefits that you can offer. And usually organizations at this size start to have a total rewards policy in place. And then we move to the larger organizations, and where this is with these organizations, plan costs are really driven by your actual utilization, your demographics. There's much more flexibility as to how you manage the risk. And in terms of resourcing it to support and focus on wellness initiatives, larger organizations tend to have that additional support. So just keeping that in mind, we do go through each of these segments and then tactics that are applicable to each. But before doing that, again, I just want to mention, like, every organization is unique. You have different populations, different regions, different insurers you're working with. So before doing anything, we always advise our clients is to understand your goals and your benefits objectives and really know your plan, your people before making any changes.
Excellent. Thanks, Jimmy. So I think, one common thread across all market segments is really kind of taking an understanding or taking the time to really understand, what is being offered by your peer groups or your competitors, or generally speaking, what's being offered from the marketplace. And so, benchmarking certainly isn't a new concept, but it certainly helps kind of scratch the itch in terms of understanding, how does my benefit plan stack up in the marketplace? And it really kind of forms the beginning of that more strategic approach when it comes to designing a benefit plan, but also designing one in a sustainable way. Where benchmarking becomes a bit limited is it certainly starts to suggest that every organization within a certain geographical part of the country, or perhaps within a certain industry or market segment, should all be doing the exact same thing. And certainly we would not support that type of assessment. And in fact, as Jimmy's noted, every organization is different, irrespective of market size, industry, et cetera. But it does start the discussion in a much more strategic and data-driven way. And benchmarking certainly would be the beginning of that process to help you understand how your benefit plan stacks up. Where we really start to see, the 2.0 discussion around kind of advisory services and counsel with our clients is really taking that benchmarking to the next level to really help you walk a mile in your employee's shoes and really start to understand, well, who's showing up for work for me on a Monday morning? And so for us, by leveraging very simple data points that sit, whether it's inside your HRIS system or a payroll system, or simply just the data that's being provided to underwriters to understand risk and set a price, we really start to leverage that data in a way to help you understand what your employee population really looks like. And for us, it's about really establishing a map. And I'll use that word map as an acronym and really kind of establishing a GPS for resilient benefit design. And MAP for us really stands for that meaningful, authentic, and more personalized types of benefit structures and total rewards design. And what you see in front of you here is that persona analysis, or that deep culture profile, to help you understand your people a little bit more. So taking that discussion from how do my benefits stack up within industry, moving towards who really is showing up for work on a Monday, and what do their unique needs look like, is established by running a persona analysis. And this will give you a sense of what that will look like.
And then from and then from a well-being perspective, going even deeper into analyzing your population by reviewing age and sex can help uncover potential employee health risks. And what's even more powerful is if you can then directly connect that to benefits ban. So in this instance, what we uncovered is that 62% of the population is over 40, where increased risk begins for various health conditions, and they represented 87% of the drug spend. So this analysis or key insight really helps to inform your well-being strategy, and also informing what your calendar could look like from a targeted initiatives perspective. But really can truly go beyond that and provide insights to making decisions for your benefits, for disability, for DE&I. It's really going to depend on what your priorities are and what comes out of the data that you are reviewing. So to echo what Jimmy said at the beginning of this segment, it's really all about using these types of tools as a framework to help you identify insights, to then help you determine what to focus on and build a plan to meet your objectives and goals.
So now we're going to move on to the actual tactics by market segment, and starting with the small organizations. And for each segment we're going to go through, we'll look at the different levers that I outlined earlier based on our cost control index, and go through the tactics under each category. As Matt mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we've also included some questions that were submitted earlier at the time of registration. So where for each of the segment, we'll include a question just for the panel here to answer as well. Okay. So looking at small organizations, and again, this is organizations that we're defining as less than 50 employees. So looking at tactics for sustainability, as I mentioned earlier, with this size, there's less of an option in terms of the financial arrangement. Typically, groups that are under 50 lives are under an insured arrangement with a carrier. But the other levers, there's options for us to look at as to what areas that can be reviewed for long-term sustainability. And one, starting with the plan design here. So as I mentioned before, with smaller organizations, typically there's less weight on the actual experience of the group, or the actual claims utilization of your benefits plan. And premiums are more based on your industry, your demographics, and your plan design. So with the plan design piece, I think it's important to review the maximums that are currently in place under different categories. And for smaller employers, it actually may be more manageable to even conduct a survey for your employees and try to get an understanding what's being valued under the benefits plan. Because if you have a population where no one is, for example, is using vision coverage, or they have vision coverage elsewhere, you could reduce the coverage under the benefit or remove it completely and see a benefit in terms of the change in your premium rate. Whereas larger organizations, it tends to be based more on usage. So I think that's where smaller organizations can take advantage of their size, is really being able to kind of get a really thorough understanding of their population needs and which benefits make sense, and the setting the appropriate maximum for each one. And so there's other ways to also manage costs, is to share costs essentially with your population. So looking at introducing modest deductibles or co-insurance to share that cost, but also looking at cost sharing in terms of benefits. So like the premium, so it could be a 50-50 split, or certain benefits the employees can take on more of the cost. We do recommend that you work with your benefits advisors when doing that, though, because there are certain benefits where it may be more tax efficient to have one arrangement over the other. A perfect example is long-term disability. So rather than split your benefits 50-50 across the board in terms of cost share with your employees, you may want to look at having employees take on 100% of the cost of the long-term disability, and then less of the cost elsewhere. And the reason for that is, under the long-term disability plan, if it's fully employee paid, then if an employee was to go and claim, the benefit they receive would be non-taxable. So it's really to understand the landscape and those type of nuances that we recommend working with your advisor whenever you're making changes like that. In terms of carrier management, one area we see that where a lot of smaller plans take advantage of that helps sustainability is being a part of an association or a buying plan. So for those who aren't familiar with those type of plans, it's essentially a group benefits plan that's available through some sort of professional trade or membership-based association. And what this does is that it allows smaller groups or smaller employers to access group rates and coverage that would typically be available for only the larger employers. So we work with actually one industry here I'm based out of Vancouver, and we work with an industry where essentially they're considered a low risk in terms of morbidity and mortality, so lower on the disability and life side. However, on a standalone basis, when they get premiums from their carriers, they're typically going to be rated based on the carrier's manual rates. But so for those groups, they're part of a bigger buying plan, and that buying plan now is being used to leverage those negotiations with the carrier, and the carrier is looking at the actual experience. And what we see there is, because they have that preferred risk and they're part of a demographic similar to theirs, we're finding that when a standalone group enters this buying plan, they're seeing savings of like 30 to 50% on just their life and LTD rate. So just something to consider out there that's available, and you may want to explore there as a smaller organization. The other items is a test to market every 3 to 5 years, just ensure rate competitiveness, and of course earlier if you're having issues with your carriers. Depending on the complexity of the plan, usually for larger groups, we would suggest waiting a bit longer, because if you were to transition carrier, it is a bit more work. But for smaller plan, if it's one plan design consistent across your employees, you can market every 3 to 5 years to just ensure that it remains competitive. And when these are being marketed, it's important to work with your advisor and make sure that they're trying to negotiate multi-year rate guarantees if possible, because that's going to create some sustainability over time and more cost certainty. But it's also important as well, when you're doing that, is to have an understanding of what your rates would look like after those rate guarantees. We've seen many situations where carriers are offering large discounts really to win the business, and that the client's not aware as to what their premiums would be, or expect the range of their premiums would be after that. So really important to make sure you have an understanding of that when you work with your carrier.
Awesome. So from an employee well-being perspective, the first tactic we wanted to share is maximize the value of your current vendor partnerships. Many organizations are leaving money on the table, or just don't know or understand what is available to them. So we would encourage you to go through your vendor contracts and see what services you have included, or what you have available as a fee for service, as that cost would still be lower than sourcing through another vendor. So for example, many insurers have wellness platforms that are part of their extended health package, and often it includes a health risk assessment, which is usually a survey that employees can fill out to understand their potential health risks at no additional cost. Another example is employee and family assistance program. You may have education sessions or trainings included at no cost, or once again at a lower cost than if you source them out through another vendor. And the second tactic is to promote EFAP. They often develop annual wellness calendars with either monthly or quarterly themes that they can share with you at no cost. And they also provide communications to direct employees to EFAP resources that are connected to those themes. If you do not have an EFAP, we would encourage you to consider this as a resource for your employees because it is a low-cost solution that can support the total health of your employees.
Okay, so now we're just going to share one of the questions that was submitted, that was pre-submitted here. So the question we have, if a small employer can only make one change to improve sustainability this year, what would you suggest? So I'll open this up before I pass it on to Matt and Lydia. And I'm going to give quite the standard consultant answer, which is it depends. And what I mean by that is, again, every population is different. And what we typically see under plans is that there could be two main drivers, depending on demographics. Like if there's plans where drugs is the main driver, there's other plans where paramedicals are the main driver. So the first step I would say is trying to find an understanding of that. And depending on that, if let's say paramedical is your main driver, is again, understanding your employees' needs. What do they value? And making sure that you are setting the appropriate paramedical limits and looking at reasonable and customary as well. That's something that's typically overlooked is there could be annual maximums for paramedical practitioners, but then also a reasonable customary limit that could be applied for any single practitioner. If on the other side, if your population is more heavier on the prescription drug utilization, just making sure that you have provisions such as mandatory generic substitution is a smart and simple way to improve plan sustainability. And again, it's easier to communicate. The population tends to have a good understanding of how generic drugs work, that they're the same active ingredients as brand names. So you're not, but significantly less expensive. So you're not taking away too much from your employees by implementing something. And savings could be significant in terms of the actual markups that we see with brand names. And these plans could see 25 to like 50% per prescription if you're looking at the generic version versus the brand name.
Awesome, thanks, Jimmy. So in the spirit of savings, I think one of the areas we often overlook is the administrative burden of keeping a plan running, whether that be from the enrollments to the salary updates, et cetera. And so, when we talk about savings, we often forget about, some of the time savings and some of the time burdens that exist inside of organizations for administering these plans. So I would encourage a lot of small employers to look to their consultants or their advisors for solutions to bridge the gap between that insurer partner and maybe a payroll system or an HR system, and really start to explore how we can get back to the business, get back to the work at hand versus spending, an absorbent amount of time administering a plan with an insurer.
And from a well-being perspective, especially if cost is a challenge for your organization, I'd come back to my first point that I talked about and review your current vendor partnership contracts and leverage all the wellness resources that are available to you at no cost. You really want to take advantage of everything that is available to your organization through those relationships instead of starting to look for something else. See what you have internally first.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the next market segment, medium organizations. So again, these are organizations that are between 50 to 200 employees. So similar format as before, so just looking at the tactics for sustainability. And here, there's the additional component here now with the financial arrangements. But just starting again with plan design, and this is a similar theme to what we saw with smaller plans, is looking at those internal maximums and limits. But because with medium organizations, now you're at a point where your actual claims experience is being weighted or being one of the main drivers as to what the premium rates that you're going to be paying. It's important to have a closer look and look at the more advanced cost containment tools that are out there. And the example, like there's, of course, with each of these benefits, there's a lot of detail that we can go into. But the example I want to look at is just more around prescription drugs. So for prescription drugs, if you look at this next slide here, it goes through, like there's a list of different types of cost containment measures that could be implemented with your plan. And it's important to consider that not just the cost savings, but how easy is it to implement, how difficult it is to communicate, manage on a go-forward basis, how it's going to be received by your employees. So those are important things to look at. And what we have here is an illustration of different examples of ways that we can manage drug costs. And on the right side, essentially a graph is to show where it would stand in terms of savings, but then also the difficulty of the implementation and communication piece as well. And I think that's a really important thing to consider as well. And so I'm just going to go through a few examples here. I'm not going to go through the list of 12, but again, just mentioning mandatory generic substitution, I mentioned earlier. This is in terms of like the savings. I said 25 to 50% potentially on compared to brand name drugs. We've seen plans that implement this reduce their overall save cost by 10 to 20% on total spend before and after the switch, but it's going to range by organization and your current utilization. And typically for this type of change, we consider it somewhat low friction. Usually you just partner with your insurer to implement this system wide, and the communication with employees tend to be more straightforward, just emphasizing the safety and the equivalency of generic drugs when this is being implemented. Down the list there's also a managed list of medicines. So this is essentially a managed formulary. So this more is focuses on coverage for drugs that are considered more clinically effective and cost-efficient drugs. So there could be significant savings from implementing something like this. However, in terms of where it sits on the scale of the difficulty, it's a bit tougher because it is an ongoing management of a list, so that can continually change as to what's covered as new drugs come to the market and new studies are conducted. And then also it'll be more difficult to communicate as well, because there could be instances where there's a drug that that one of your employees is currently covered that now is no longer covered as part of the change of implementing a managed formulary. So again, another consideration there. And just one final example I wanted to go over is just the last one, the preferred postal pharmacy. So this is essentially, with different pharmacy, they may have different markups or different dispensing fees for drugs. So having a preferred pharmacy list where some of the pharmacies that have the lower dispensing fees, the lower markups, providing a higher co-insurance of coverage if a plan member was to go there. Whereas if they were not to go there, they would still get coverage, but at a lower co-insurance. So that's something that we see some plans implement. Of course, again, you want to consider your population. If you have a lot of employees in a remote place where they don't have many of those preferred pharmacies available to them, it may be seen as not fair. So again, with all the advice we're given today, it's really important to go back to your employee population and really see if these changes make sense for you. So just going back onto the different tactics here. So the next one under the plan design is leveraging health spending accounts is a good way, of course, to add flexibility to the health claims that are covered, but also limit the annual spend. And using claims audits or just reviewing claims that are coming through. And a good example I have of this, it just happened just last week. I was on a call with insurer presenting the claims utilization for the quarter, and they had as their 5th top category weight loss drugs. And one of the consultants I was on the call with, she messages me right away and she said, "Jimmy, I don't think the plan covers weight loss drugs." And of course, when we followed up with the carrier afterwards, the carrier did confirm that during the initial setup, they had switched the coverage for the weight loss drugs on. So this is something that was not intended to be covered, but the insurer was paying. So just simple claims audits like that could actually be very helpful in terms of managing your cost and ensuring sustainability. On the carrier management side, so here, this is where you're getting more data. So it's just important to review the quarterly and semi-annual experience to making sure that you're monitoring those trends correctly, or monitoring those trends closely. And then the other piece here, especially when you're getting closer to the 200 employee size, you can start exploring unbundled services models. So not necessarily having to go to one carrier for all your benefits. There could be carriers out there that specialize more on accidental death and dismemberment that you can get lower rates on, and it would be easy to manage that way, to have it with them, but then also have different carriers cover different benefits. And again, here I also have test the market. This has 4 to 7 years versus the 3 to 5 that we saw under the small organization. Again, even if you're happy with your carrier, it's a good governance exercise just to see what's out there and just to ensure that your plan remains competitive. And finally, the piece here with the financial arrangements. So under this piece, as an organization grows larger, they do have the option of taking on some more of that risk. And when you have a benefit like dental, where the frequency is high, but you're not going to have astronomical types size claims, you could manage that and take on some of that risk. And looking at different underwriting arrangements. So one arrangement that I just wanted to outline is looking at under refund arrangement. So this is very similar to an insured arrangement, except at the end of the year, at the end of the financial year, you could potentially share in the results of the year. So what I mean by that is if premiums were greater than claims and expenses, then after considering different reserves and everything, if there could be an excess surplus that could be refunded to your organization. But vice versa, if claims were higher than premiums, then you may be in a deficit. So just something to consider. That arrangement, a refund arrangement, is a bit unique because it's still fully insured. So if you are in a deficit position, you can walk away from the carrier, leaving that deficit with the carrier. Of course, the carrier will build in different types of fees to avoid that situation, but that is an option to look at. I could probably spend a whole hour talking about these different underwriting arrangements, but I'm not gonna pass it on to Lydia. But it is important to explore those different financial arrangements as your organization grows.
Great, thank you. So now that we're talking about medium-sized organizations, you typically are going to have more resources available for your employees. And often what we hear is that employees don't know where to find the resources or know what kind of resources are even available to them. So the first thing we would recommend is completing an inventory review to understand all the current resources available to employees. Start with those vendor contracts, like I had indicated earlier. And then what you want to do is reach out to different parts of the business, especially areas that you don't own and don't know what they offer. So for example, if you are in HR, you may not own the training department. So there might be a learning catalog with training options that aligns with supporting your employees' total health or mental health, and you're going to want to jot that down. And then you're going to want to explore other areas of the business as well. So do you have a DE&I committee? Talk to them. Do you have health and safety? They're all contributing to the well-being of your employees, and you're going to want to collect all of that information. Once you know what you have, you're going to want to organize that information and put it in one place. So for example, that could be an intranet, that could be a SharePoint, that could be a Teams channel. Really what we suggest is that you pick one and pick the one that is easiest to navigate for your employees to find the information. Now, this is not an easy task. This takes a lot of time and a lot of work, but when it's organized and employees can access the information easily, it's really going to bode well for everybody. And finally, you are going to then want to communicate the resources to your employees. And you're going to want to do that regularly, but with intention. So plan a communication calendar for the next year. See if you can combine efforts with other departments or initiatives, or connect it to a health observance. So for example, July 24th is Self-Care Day. That's a really great opportunity to say, hey, take care of yourself. And oh, did you know we have all these supports available to you, and it's all here in one spot. So the key here is that you want your employees to know that you have curated supports in a place to help them when they need it, and it's easy for them to find it.
Thanks for that, Lydia. So the pre-submitted question we have here for medium organizations, as a company with 86 employees in Canada, what are some tips for staying competitive in benefit offering while managing cost? So for this one, I'm going to let Lydia answer first, just reverse order.
Awesome, great, thank you. So from a well-being perspective, to stay competitive while maintaining cost, I think what I would highlight is that if you have EFAP, is to keep EFAP and to communicate that. EFAP is not for everyone at all times, but when they need it, you want to encourage your employees to seek out help. And if you don't have EFAP, what are the other supports that you need in place instead of EFAP? Sometimes to replace EFAP, it's actually going to cost you more money than paying for EFAP for an entire year. So EFAP is really a great cost-effective solution, and they provide so many different options. I think what's really key is having your employees understand what EFAP is and what are all the different offerings that fall under EFAP. In addition to that, you want to pick the right vendor and the model that aligns with your philosophy and what your employees need. The landscape has changed so much in the EFAP space, so we would encourage you to re-educate yourself around them. And around communications, I mean, I think what's really important to highlight is that we know that workplaces are neurodiverse. You know, Matt alluded earlier around 5 generations in the workplace, and we have different personas. So it's really important to take that information and consider when building out your communication strategy. So you want to go beyond your typical communications of email and posting things on the internet. So it's really about understanding, you know, how different people are going to take on that information. So you might want to develop a video. You might have TV screens, so you might be a manufacturing group and have TV screens, and you might have a cohort of people that just want a QR code and they just want to scan something to get information. And you might have a cohort of people that really like the face-to-face, so you might want to do a road show. Or you can even develop a champion network where you have people who can influence and really be a peer-to-peer communication and share stories and testimonials. I mean, ultimately, in the end, if you can get people comfortable enough to get help through EFAP and follow through with that help, you may be able to prevent a disability claim and keep your employees at work. And that will also help save you on cost as well.
I love that, Lydia. And I think, a close colleague of mine and mentor of mine, always reemphasized that communication always happens on the listener's terms, right? So getting that communication strategy, getting it right, spending some good time thinking about it is so important. I also love the idea of prevention over prescription. So making sure there's access to those EAP plans is certainly a great sustainability and competitive type of tactic. From my desk, certainly I would argue as your companies grow from 5 employees to 50 to, in this case, 86, it becomes really, really important to understand who the people are that form your organization, the population, understanding their needs. And this is where data really starts to take shape. And persona analysis will certainly equip you with some guidance in terms of how to address the benefit needs of this population. So for me, Jimmy, simply from a cost savings perspective, making sure every dollar is going to serve you, your organization, and the goals of your organization becomes incredibly important, and data certainly will help you do that.
Yeah, and for me, just back to the plan design, and I mentioned it earlier, a good option is introducing, if you don't already have one, healthcare spending accounts, right? Like that is a way to add that flexibility, stay competitive, but at the same time with these spending accounts, you're able to put an annual cap on them. And a lot of times employees don't fully utilize the full amount. So that's something to also consider as well. And again, for anyone who's not familiar with health spending accounts, so essentially it typically would cover a wide range of the CRA medical eligible expenses. So those are the ones that are defined under the Income Tax Act. And again, we find it a great way to add that flexibility, but then to contain costs as well. So something to consider. All right, so now we move to our final market segment, large organizations, 200 plus employees. So in the interest of time here, I'm not going to go through each of these bullet points, but there are a few I do want to highlight. In particular, the ones under plan design here. So the first one, enhancing benefit that support preventative health. And this actually ties back to what Matt just said about using data. And there's an example I want to give here. Of course, like if you're looking at your data and you see that there's claims linked to mental health or a certain type of therapeutic class, you can build a plan that can be preventative around that. And in terms of data, we've recently had a client where we really did a deep dive into their claims usage, and what we saw was that there was a lot of drugs related to mental health, but we noticed that for certain claimants, there's different types of drugs doing the same type of addressing the same diagnosis. And what that told us is that, especially for mental health, for something like depression, there's so many different drugs out there. Our bodies interact with drugs in different ways. And what this data was telling us is that there's a bit of drug wastage, that there's individuals being prescribed certain drugs and that didn't work and they would have to go on a different one. So what we suggested to the client is introducing pharmacogenetics, where it would be a test and it's essentially matches like the best drug based on your genetic makeup. And it's only been a year since this is implemented, but we're already seeing decreases in the drug usage for mental health drugs. So again, there could be ways to enhance benefit that way, but that will seem like an upfront cost, but in the long term actually reduce your cost if it's used the right way. So something to consider there under the plan design. The next bullet, there are multiple plan tiers. So this is essentially looking at a flexible benefits plan. And I know there may be individuals on the call that would say, well, under a flexible benefits plan, because you're giving more choice, that could drive costs up, which is true. But there are ways you can structure a flex plan to actually help manage the cost. And of course, one way is introducing an option where it's a coordination of benefits option. So if the plan member has coverage elsewhere, it's really relying on that. And then this option is really just covering, let's say, like 20%, like the remaining co-insurance that they wouldn't get from a spouse's plan, is a way to shift the cost off your plan. The other piece too with the way flex plans work is it's how it's structured, right? You can have like a model where you're looking at price tags and credits, and those are additional levers that can be pulled year over year when you're trying to manage costs. So if you do see an increase in cost for a certain area, you can actually shift some of that cost to the employees by managing those levers. So again, it's another option to manage costs, but again, it does with a flex plan that's going to involve a bit more complexity, a bit more administration, but something to consider. And one last piece here under the plan design is provincial plans. So I know there's participants on this call across Canada. With the provincial plans, it's all very different. Like here, based out of BC, we're more integrated with the BC Pharmacare plan. But I know that that's not the case within different provinces. So it's really doing a further review in terms to making sure that your plan design is aligned with each of the provincial plans and ensure that you're maximizing that integration if available. And of course, with the recent news, of course, with national pharmacare and the trend with where we're going in terms of diabetic drugs, again, it's something that you should be monitoring closely with your advisor and making the appropriate plan design changes as there's new developments. So in terms of like the carrier management and financial arrangements, I would say these two are very similar to the medium size organization, except they're a bit going in a bit more depth. One item I do want to mention before passing it on to Lydia for the employee well-being is the under carrier management, the performance guarantees, right? And ensuring that carriers are doing what they're doing in terms of service. And that could impact your claims as well, especially under the disability side. So ensuring that carriers are getting in front of those claimants as early as possible, trying to put together a return to work program, making sure that those employees that are on claim that are appropriately supported. So just another consideration in terms of how costs can be managed for a large organization.
Awesome. Great. So you're going to hear a bit of an ongoing theme here, because I'm also going to talk a little bit about data, because really, truly, everything that we do is rooted in data. So when you are a larger organization, you have more access to data. And so the first item that we would suggest is analyzing all of your benefit data. And you want to review that data to understand your employee health risks. You know, we talked a little bit about this, about population and demographics, but you really want to go beyond that. And what you see on the screen here, so you want to look at your drugs, your paramedicals, disability, whatever you can get your hands on, as well as any kind of wellness data. So I referenced health risk assessments earlier. You can get reporting from that. So if you were to implement a health risk assessment for your employees, you'd get a fulsome report to see where some of the additional risks are. If you have an engagement survey, anything that you have really can help build your story. That data is going to help you prioritize your next steps and how you wish to evolve your strategy, or help you even develop the strategy if you're starting out. The second point is to invest in your people leaders. Many large organizations, ask me and they'll say, if there was one thing that you had to invest in, what would that be? And I say your people leaders. They play a really important role in employee mental health. Why? Well, studies have shown that managers have the same impact as a spouse on mental health, and it's often the number one reason why an employee may leave their job, because of their manager and that relationship and how they've been treated. So it's really important to keep your people leaders informed, so communicate with them. Educate them on supports available. So that example I gave earlier about cleaning up your intranet and putting all your resources all in one spot, you're going to want to inform your people leaders about that and educate them so that they know how to direct their employees to get information for help. And you're also going to want to provide ongoing training. And that really is about everything. So it's not only about mental health training, for example, but you're going to also want to train your people leaders around your disability management programs, about EFAP, and even their own professional development. It's really about having an ongoing conversation and having a really clear plan for your people leaders. And the last item is review and update your policies annually, and that's going to help mitigate risk. A first good step is to do an inventory review. So document all the policies that you have, identify when they were last updated, and then you'll start to see some of the gaps. You should also check some provincial laws and regulations, because there are some different laws that come into place that you may want to be weaving into your policies. And then it's not just about reviewing and updating them, it's about educating and training and making sure people understand what their role is as it relates to these policies, especially for people leaders, because sometimes there's policies that will identify what a people leader's role is. And so you're going to want to make sure that you give them all the information that they need to be able to help execute that policy. So what we thought we would do is give a little bit of a case study to really highlight the importance of analyzing your data. And so we thought we would share this with you. So to give you an example, in year one for this particular client, we did a baseline and we reviewed all of their data in year one. Based on that data, we then built a strategy, determined objectives, built out metrics to see what we wanted to change over time. And then we determined the interventions that were going to make an impact to the changes that we wanted to see. So then we executed the strategy, we implemented the targeted interventions for a 3-year period, and everything was really positive. Employees were engaged, they wanted to learn, they were participating, and the feedback was really positive. And this was from an individual health perspective. So then what we did was we thought, hey, let's reanalyze the data. And then what you see here on the top half of this slide is the progression in what you see. And on the right-hand side is what I really like to highlight for you is mental disorders. So when we started to look at the total cost of all the different benefits that this employer had, you can see that in year one, the cost for mental disorders was a little less than $300K. And then in year 4, it became a little over $700K. That's a really big difference. And so we obviously needed to pause for a moment and reflect and go, okay, wait, we did this great program in place with strategic interventions. People are participating and they're happy. However, they're getting unhealthier. Why? Why is that happening? So then what we decided to do was focus groups. And what we heard were things like, help me with stress management. I am burnt out. Work-life demands leave no time to focus on my health. So this allowed us to reflect and adjust our path to meet the needs of the employees from an organizational health perspective, because that is what we started to hear from the employees and also from the data. So we needed to pivot. So really what we're trying to highlight here is that if we didn't do that robust review after that 3-year period, we probably would have gone down that same path and continued on our journey because the feedback was really positive. But it wasn't really tackling the true issues employees were having and facing. So with this approach, we were able to take action immediately. So we looked at the data, took action by doing the focus group, shift our focus, and now we believe we're going down a better path, and we actually are doing it a little bit quicker. So with this in mind, We also wanted to highlight that it's important to be mindful of this particular continuum. So when you're thinking about your interventions after you've looked at your data, best practice indicates ensuring that all of these 3 levels are considered for best results. Now, you're not going to be able to do this all at once. It takes a long time to do this. However, through your data analytics review, you can start to prioritize and choose what you wish to tackle first and then build upon that. So for example, on the far left, you're healthy. How are you going to keep your people healthy and happy at work and productive? What are the interventions that you're going to be considering? Then you go into the next bucket. Same question. What are the interventions that you want to put into place? And what barriers are they facing so that you can start to move them from at risk to healthy? And then finally, you've got those that are on disability. So not only do you want to be thinking about interventions and helping those that go off on disability, but also thinking about those people that stay at work. So for example, if you have a team of 5, and let's say 2 people go off on disability, you have 3 people that are remaining at work. What kind of supports are you going to provide those individuals to help them through that change? And then what are you going to do when that individual comes back to work and how to support them? And then of course, those that are disabled as well and on a long-term disability. So on that note, we want to delve a little bit deeper about disability. And these are not questions that we received ahead of time. This is what we are hearing from our clients and the challenges that they're facing. So if you are reading these statements and nodding your head because they resonate with you and this is happening to you right now, we would suggest completing a whole disability process audit. This audit can help you identify the why behind these statements, and give you examples as to, why, like give you the context behind that. So for example, I'll give you some examples here. You want to do a deeper dive into your data, because when you say words like my claims are increasing, we want to level set that. Is it increasing exponentially every year? Are you within benchmark? You want to be asking yourself some different types of questions to really understand what that means. And also sometimes you might not have the right data. So, we're working with a client right now where what their priorities are and what the data set that they're receiving is actually not matching up. So asking a few more questions about that might be helpful. Also understanding internal roles versus external roles is really important. Is it working? Is it documented? What we're seeing sometimes is that if you have individuals internally that's managing disability and they have their role and then you've got a third-party provider, sometimes those roles are overlapping and they are doing the same roles, so that can create some challenges or some frustrations. So documenting and really identifying what the roles are is going to be really important. Another piece is governance meetings. We've got a lot of clients that have quarterly meetings, and there are opportunities sometimes to just tighten up the processes and redefine the rules of engagements to ensure that you're meeting your expectations and your priorities. Policies is another way. So sometimes what we're seeing is that the policy that you have developed is not necessarily aligned of how the program is being managed, or sometimes altogether you may not have a policy. So it's really important to be aligning those two together. And then finally, education and training. Education training for the individual going off on leave, for the manager that has to work through that leave, to internal roles and external roles. So the above are some suggestions that could help with the comments that are stated here, because this could also be impacting the well-being of the employees that are going through the process and those that may be even leading the process as well. So I've kind of looked at this from this well-being lens, but Jimmy, actually, before we go to before we go to the key takeaways, Jimmy, I was curious and wanted to ask from your perspective, from an actuarial perspective, what can a large organization consider when reviewing their claims cost for those on disability?
Yeah, so just really quick, if there's like a disability process audit, or you're doing something that can help those recoveries, that could impact the reserves that carriers are holding, and that is one of the big factors in terms of how they set premium rates. So, like at Hub, obviously, and I'm a bit biased being an actuary, but we our team does do that work, and we can help support organizations that have those policies in place to make sure that the premium rates that they're paying carriers reflects those efforts. Okay. All right, well, thanks, Lydia. I'll pass it back to Matt here to just close it off with some of the key takeaways.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Lydia. So in terms of key takeaways and what we hope we've left you with today, we've kind of grouped this into a number of different buckets. And, it really starts with understanding how do your benefits stack up and really start that data-driven type of strategy. So, from basic benchmarking to persona analysis, understanding the competitive position and where you want to be, and taking that further deep dive into who your employees are with that persona analysis would be step one. Know your data, or know thy data. We really see data as the great enabler to help shape talent brands and total rewards as a whole. And without it, we're simply just not as equipped as we could be. So leverage your data in a way to serve you and serve the goals of the organization. Develop a multi-year strategy. I mean, let's face it, much of what we've covered today can feel like drinking from a fire hose. And certainly we would not suggest trying to deploy all of these strategies, in 1 year or in a short window. So map out your multi-year strategy, be nimble, be responsive, listen to your people, and make sure that strategy is serving you well. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I mean, it's as straightforward as it sounds, and yet we often lose sight of how effective a strong communication strategy can be with the right vehicles and really meeting those people where they are and how they want to consume content. Last but not least, we understand, in acknowledging time, we haven't probably covered all of the questions and responded to all of you. However, we'd enjoy and certainly appreciate you completing our survey to help shape future presentations, and also give us the opportunity to follow up with you on any questions that remain unanswered. So thank you very much for joining Jimmy, Lydia, and I today, and I will pass it back to our moderator.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Hub International, I want to thank you all for joining today's webinar. Any questions you may have submitted today will be shared with Hub advisors for follow-up. And as a reminder, please fill out the survey before you close your browser. Your feedback helps us develop future events. Thank you again for joining us. This now concludes today's broadcast.